if you don't have healthy relationships, you can do everything else well, and you're still going to struggle from a wellness standpoint.
It's actually relationships with other people. What's up, Brian? Good to have you here, brother.
Great to be here. Appreciate it, Larry.
I'm excited to do this interview, man. I want to start off with actually a situation, a conversation that you had, and that was with your dad, and that was with your dad on his deathbed. And I want you to share that story because it's insanely powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first off, it's great to be here, and really, when I think about what you're all about and what this is all about, I mean, I think about this story. I mean, so my dad. This was back in 2013. My dad was dying of lung cancer, and I'd started a cadence where I was visiting him over the lunch hour. He had just entered hospice, and he was getting ready to pass, right? And he was still of full faculty and cognizance. And I was visiting him over the lunch hour, and the context behind this, which I think hopefully can resonate with a lot of people with different stages of life they're in. I had a lot of earthly success. I had a good career. I was in my 30s. I was running a small little business unit at a publicly traded company, traveling around the country, making a lot of money, doing well, happy marriage, happy life, two kids. But I was so intense, and professionally I was kind of miserable, right? So, but from the external perspective, I had it all. Internally, I was kind of dying and struggling a little bit. And so I go visit my dad, and he was again, he was getting close to the end, and I was complaining. I was Larry. I was upset about something that was happening at work, like this, that, or the other, and I basically was focused on myself, and that's where the story starts, right? Because my dad stopped me about face and said, "Brian, hey, I'm going to be leaving this world in a few weeks. Now I'm ready to go, but I'm worried about you. Are you ready? And what on earth are you chasing? Because you have seemingly everything in this world, but what on earth are you chasing?" And for me, like, that deeply personal hit me like a 2x4.
I bet.
And in the wake of his passing, and in the weeks and months following, it was really a reflection on life, on what I was pursuing. Was I pursuing things for my own personal selfish ambition, or was I really trying to live out like the life, frankly, he taught me to lead, and that's to help others, serve others, and surrender your own selfish ambition to help others get what they want. And so that really began in me this manifestation and journey that led to my career, my career changing over time, and my pursuits up through now, and why we're here today, for example.
What was it? Tell me about the relationship you had with your dad growing up. What was that like for you?
Well, my dad was a retired colonel from the U.S. Army, and was a guy's guy, leader's leader, ran a small business, and was very well respected in the community. Never really pursued, monetary, like, greed or success. I mean, he was successfully ran a small business, but that wasn't his focus. And so when you ask about the relationship that we had with them, my siblings and I, we were very close. We had a very traditional upbringing, and my father always made sure to understand the what respect meant in the household. Again, being an ex-military, retired military leader, but also just how to be in relationship with others, and how to interact with others, and how to really focus on helping others. I mean, there were times. I mean, a story just when I was a little kid, I remember going up the stairs, and there's some guy that my dad was talking to in the parking, or in our driveway. And I asked my mom, like, "Who's that?" I was probably 9 or 10. And my mom's response was, "Well, that's just somebody your dad's helping out." And I'm like, "What do you mean helping out?" "Well, he's just had a tough time, and your dad is helping him out." And I remember thinking to myself, what does that even mean? and it wasn't until I got to, years later, where I realized that he was really a servant leader. I mean, he would do a lot for others, and not think about himself. And so I just think about his legacy and how what that taught in me as his as one of his kids and siblings. Pretty powerful stuff.
I would say so. What do you, I'm curious about this question. So you're looking through the eyes of a kid and your mom says, your dad's helping that guy out. And so you're like, I don't even know what that means. So I would love for you for you to share, like, over time as a kid, what did you find that meant when your dad was helping somebody out? And then as an adult, what did that actually, what did it actually mean?
Well, I think the big lesson as a kid is that I learned through his actions, not through his words. So like, a lot of, I even like as I look at myself as a parent, I have a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I think if you were to ask my wife, she'd probably agree. Most of the positive attributes that I elicit as a father are caught, not taught. I'm not a great professor. I'm not a great like teacher per se, but if you come along and just follow me and watch how I interact, watch how I help people, I think I'm you're going to catch some really good things. And I'd like to believe my kids have benefited from that, from me being as a parent. So when I look at my dad as a father, very similar. I think I learned that from him. He wasn't a guy that was going to preach to you and espouse virtues and it with thou shalt. But what he did say oftentimes is just observe, just listen. Watch how I interacted. Do you see how I interacted with that person? Do you see why I did this? And I think that it was transcendent. And so when I fast forward, as I became a young adult, going off to college, young professional, and all those sorts of things, I really started to have it grow in my deep respect for my father even more because I started to connect the dots on what that meant. Oh, he's just helping this guy, right? I started to understand what that meant. It was the surrender of selfish ambition and truly that our roles here on earth are to help and serve others, not just focus on ourselves. And that was probably the biggest lesson I learned is just it was never really about him.
It was about the service of others, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And maybe even teaching you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was probably one of the biggest things that he was trying to do, right? Maybe
Yeah.
do you think and are you okay if we stay on this topic for a second? Because I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I'll interrupt and give you a story. So my
Please,
my
yeah.
dad when my dad passed away, um, I was basically told the story about how when he was a young business person, he worked at a small company that he ended up running. It was the same company he ended up running. It was after he got out of the military, and the owner came to him and said, "Hey, I want to sell you my business. You're basically running it for me. I'll sell it to you on a seller note. Just and I'm a business guy, right? So I'm interested in hearing that type of stuff, right?" And my dad said, "No, no, no, no. There's this new legislation going on that called an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. I think we should convert the company to an ESOP. In other words, my dad could have bought the business for next, peanuts on a seller note, really nice transition, and he would own the company. That company grew from being very small, like $1 million in sales kind of size to like 60, 70, 80 million. I think today it's like over like a couple hundred million in sales, right? And my dad would have ran the business the same, right? But at that moment in time, he wasn't focused on himself or his personal glory or achievement. He focused, well, why don't I have the employees own the company with me? And so, like, to me, that was like an incredible example of, like, in a very earthly professional sense, like me being as a business leader and a business owner today, realizing how like sacrificial my dad was. And it just blows me away to think that, he could have gone and owned that business and have grown it just like he did, and he would have owned all of it. Instead, he owned a small percentage of it, along with his other whatever it was, 100 employees, I think, at the time of his retirement. And so I think of that, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty powerful for me. Again, coming from a business person, so I think that's a great story.
I would say so. I mean, that's really a selfless act, right? Your dad has this tremendous opportunity to buy out, this company and even the transaction itself is super appetizing, but he decides to go with more of this servant mentality, right? As far as him passing of lung cancer, How old was he?
He was only 67 when he passed away. He was a young man. So, when I even think back on that, having to grow up, in the wake of his passing, my kids, I believe, were 8 or 9, and 4 or 5 at the time. And where I get emotional is thinking about how they weren't able to experience a lot of those grandpa kind of activities with him. And he taught me enough virtues and the way he acted and lived out his life and carried his life, that will live with me forever, for sure. But I can only hope to espouse the same type of translation to my kids. But certainly, even just talking about my dad a lot with my kids has proven to be extremely valuable for them as I've watched them grow up. And yeah, but he was a young guy.
That is way too young. Way too young to go. My goodness. I definitely want to talk about your book, which is called Winsome. But before we jump into this, I just want to ask you a few questions just about your own family and how you
Yeah,
navigate things. So you've been married now for, you said, 25 years. Is that correct?
yeah. It's hard to. I'm
So
not quite, almost 25, but yeah, yep.
so quarter of a decade of marriage.
Quarter of a century.
I'm sorry, yeah, quarter of a century. What am I thinking? Yeah, that's what I meant to. Thank you.
Yeah,
Quarter of a century, right? And on top of it, how long were your parents married before your dad passed?
they were married right around 40 years when
Okay.
he passed. Yep.
So you've seen 40 years of how your dad operated in his marriage. And you shared with me what kind of dad he was. What kind of husband was he?
I think he was. I mean, the epitome of respect and class. And I saw my parents, bicker at times and have some tiffs and all those sort of things. But what was unique about it, Larry, was the spirit around it. There was a spirit of like love and respect around it that sort of transcended like the argument itself. And and even like that, I tell my employees in my businesses, you got to be comfortable with conflict, right? And I think the one takeaway from my parents' marriage is that even like they had the highest of highs. I mean, they loved each other, they're devoted to each other, loyalty, all that stuff, devotion and respect. But then to apply those attributes in the lowest of lows, right? When they maybe were upset at each other, or there's tiffs going on, like how they would handle things with love and respect, and then they'd quickly burp it and move past it. That was probably my biggest takeaway. Even as I applied to my marriage with Megan and I, when we have disagreements or tiffs, frankly, usually it's my doing, which leads is a good segue when we talk about Winsome, but also um, to love and truth, and to know that love is above and beyond the situation or the circumstance. And I think that is what my folks taught me, specifically my dad, as a man, and from a manhood standpoint, how to really handle conflict with those you love the most. And I've grown to see that as a competitive advantage, frankly, with relationships. How do you manage strife and disagreements? I still don't handle it as well as I like to, but I like to also believe I'm kind of being sanctified as I go through life and getting better and better every day with this notion of self-awareness around loving, having the love, transcend the circumstance.
I love that, man. And by the way, I've got my wife calling me right now, and I can't, even though we're in the middle of a podcast, I have to answer her. So,
Oh, that's
oh,
awesome.
hello?
Did you want a coffee or is it too late?
Are you gonna get me a coffee? You're so
Sorry,
sweet.
I sent you a text a while ago.
Oh, sorry. I'm podcasting as we speak. You're actually on the airwaves right now. Do you want to say hi to the Dad Edge audience? Guys, that's my introverted wife, Jessica, and big crowds scare her, especially hundreds
I,
of thousands. So,
I
I'll
love
take
it.
a decaf if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I love you.
Tall, okay.
Tall, fine. I said tall's fine.
Okay.
All right, thank
All
you.
right.
Love you.
All right.
Bye.
Let me take it.
All right, so out of 1,300 episodes, my wife, I've never had a phone conversation with my wife, but here's the joke. Maybe you can relate to this. My wife doesn't call me unless there's something wrong. Like I'll
Oh,
get a
yeah.
text, right? But a phone call is like, oh, something's wrong. So I had to answer that. But it was for a coffee, but that's okay.
So you know what I
So
love about that,
what's
Larry?
that?
So Bob Goff, who's if you've read any of Bob Goff's books, he's a great author. He's a great speaker. He talks about love being commitment and sacrifice. Okay, love equals commitment and sacrifice. Okay, and what I love about you showed love for your wife just there, through commitment and frankly sacrifice. You sacrifice. I mean, we're live on podcast, and you're like, excuse me, this is sacrifice for my wife, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the ultimate forms of love, and I'm serious. I mean, as silly as it is, it's a form of love by showing that sacrifice. So it's just well done. That's awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. I no, I appreciate that. Like, I really did think she was gonna say something was wrong, but the funny thing was too is like, my wife, like she's one of the best people on the planet. Like she is, like in my mind, the best person on the planet. Low drama. I always ask her, like, because we have four boys. I'm like, how do you stay so steady? And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, you never like have these crazy roller coaster rides of emotions and outbursts and craziness. Like you were just like steady as they come. And she was like, yeah, I just do my thing. But here's she's very introverted. So like anything in front of like large groups, like me being on this microphone right now, she'll tell you I could never do that. So the fact that she was like, I was like, want to say hi to the Dad Edge audience? I could just see her in her car, like, oh my God, no, please. But yeah, anyway. But the Winsome. So like the title like literally had me, right? And it's got this home plate on it and that kind of thing. But I mean, I'm so fascinated with why you titled this thing Winsome because, like, if you look at a lot of other books, right? Like Tim Grover, Winning, right? Or Learn to Win, or Win the Day, or like, it's like win everything. But yours is Win Some. So tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a play on the definition of the word winsome, with how you interact with people, and it's a relational fable, right? So, but really, the name comes from the reflection on how to come alongside people relationally without the goal of winning. So this notion of winning some, yeah, I mean, you want to create a win-win environment and all that, whatever cliche you want to use, but at the end of the day, being winsome is coming alongside people, focusing on what they're looking to do. Really, it really comes down to you're trying to convey a message, but doing it in a way that they can understand and relate to. Okay. The reality is oftentimes that doesn't mean that you're going to win. So the fact that the definition of the word winsome is conveying something in a way that draws them in, without the necessarily the reality that you're going to win in the argument. It just sort of led to this. As I reflected on it, as I twisted on that word and that those words, I'm like, what a great relational fable name, because we're going to you're going to win some. And then the other thing is, when I was buying a lot of small businesses, and that's what I do for a living. And I had a lot of business people ask me, like, how are you able to buy these businesses from these business owners that are that are trying to retire and whatnot? And I started using the description, like, well, you just got to be winsome. And so it was a kind of a culmination of all these situations that really led me. I truly believe spirit led to write this book, and it was very cathartic, just based on who I am and my personality, to write this book on a relational fable.
Yeah, and the fable thing. So, this book is written about a pro baseball player, fictional character named Sam Masterson. Um, but so many people in this space, which I would call it, personal development and that kind of thing. It's always nonfiction, right? It's always I would say real world stories. But yours is a fable. Why did you choose to write a fable over something nonfiction?
Well, first off, I love hearing stories. I've learned in my life, as I've traveled the country and in some cases world, and I've listened to different people's stories, different people professionally, I'm always drawn into a story. So it's made me a better storyteller when I'm with people. But then when I think about reading books, I mean, I've read a lot of different books over the years. I mean, I love authors, like friends of mine like John Gordon, John Maxwell, and others that like have just do such good jobs. Gordon writes a lot of fables. Maxwell writes a kind of authority leadership sort of books that I draw on every word he writes. And so when I reflected on how do I articulate what I'm trying to say about being relational with others and surrendering your selfish sort of desire in the moment, I was like, there's no better way to say it for me than like through a fable, through a story, right? And then the other brutal reality is I don't have a high degree of attention. I wasn't going to be able to write a 400, 500 page book with, and I'm thinking if the millennials and zennials are anything like how I am, I'm a Gen Xer. They're gonna lose interest in my book if I don't keep it short, sweet, and more of a fable. So whether they're listening to it or reading it, so that was kind of what made me compelled to. I'm gonna keep this sucker short. I want to tell a story in a very efficient way, there's simple truths that exist in it when learning more about Sam and his plight.
Yeah, so Sam is really battling with he feels like he's a failure, even though he's playing baseball on the pro level. And he opens up to things that are going to improve his life, but he's dealing with some demons. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, Sam's issue is he's an aging professional. So in other words, he's been super successful. Money isn't an issue for him. Financial success he's achieved through his athletic abilities. He had an unfortunate circumstance where his wife passed away. He's at the end of his career. He's ailing. He's in he's off. He's kind of banged up and injured all the time because he's getting old. He's got a son who's a teenager, and he's not getting along with him at all. There's this strife that exists, right? And so those are the conditions that Sam's faced with, and so he's finding himself in his thought bubble. So think of all of us, for the listeners, dads out there, right? This thought bubble you always have. It might be when you're driving home from work. It might be when you're in the moment with the kids at the grocery store, as Sam found himself in. It might be in these moments where you're headed to some family event, like with grandma and grandpa, and your thought bubble allows you to sort of leads you to certain responses to things, right? And in Sam's case, he has really good desires and intentions, right? In the book, he even talks about how he's driving home from baseball as a professional, right, and wanting to do the right thing. But then he's having all these thoughts of, woe is me, and he was kind of obsessed with the being down and out around that. And then he gets home, even though he's got the greatest of intentions to do all the right things with his son, he lets the circumstances dictate his relational connections with his son. In this case, it erodes it, right? I mean, it causes friction. Sam's not mad at his son. He doesn't want to have an ill will towards his son. He's letting the circumstances impact his situation and specifically his relationships. And so what this book really does is I have it be a 5-tool framework. It uses the play on baseball with the home plate, 5 corners, right? And it's a 5-tool framework to really help handle situations better. And I love this book for so many different reasons. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think it's something that everybody can relate to. I've gotten feedback from a lot of folks, like younger folks, like middle schoolers and high schoolers who have read the book that have talked about how it's had an impact on their life and how they treat and look at relationships. And so I just, it was really cathartic for me, and it's, I hope everybody can read it.
So, he loses his wife. He's got a strained relationship with his son. I think obviously his particular, some of the things that he's facing, some of them I think are relatable to a lot of guys out there, and some aren't. Like the financial freedom piece. I know the majority of people out there are chasing that one. That's definitely like a problem or an issue that people are really trying to address or to save as much money as they can. But relationships, these are the things that are now, and the studies have proven this now, that the number one impact on our mental, emotional, and even physical health, it's not necessarily the exercise, it's not nutrition, it's not therapy, it's actually relationships with other people.
Yeah.
It's the relationship capital we have. So like the relationship we have with our kids, the relationship we have with our people we work with, our own parents, our spouses, all of these things, the quality of those relationships will have the greatest impact on our overall mental emotional health. um, he has this encounter with a cashier, and this puts everything on the line for him, and he responded initially a bit differently, but he also considers changing. Tell us about this interaction that he has with the cashier in the book.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love you pointing out that relationships take a bigger toll on one's health, overall health, than a lot of other things that we think drive true wellness, right? And so, just a powerful stat for everybody who's listening. I mean, just if you don't have relationships, healthy relationships, you can do everything else well, and you're still going to struggle from a wellness standpoint. And that's just really profound to me, and I'm glad you brought that up. So in this situation that you referenced, Sam is with his son at the cashier at the grocery store, and he's irritable again for all this stuff. Again, think of all the situations we all have in life. And by the way, you mentioned this book doesn't really touch on the like financial stress. It's different kind of stress, but the same relational strife can be can occur because of financial stress. And so, like, think of it if you're at the paying you're with your son at the cashier of a grocery store, and maybe for you it's like, oh my gosh, my son wants to buy way too much, or we're spending way too much, and this is ridiculous. I want, we were hoping to keep our budget, blah blah blah, whatever. It could be anything. In this example, though, Sam loses his cool with the cashier, and being a very public figure, he has to deal with the consequences of that. And I'll let you read the book to kind of find out how he handles it. But the reality is he did not initially handle it well in the moment, and he came around through coming alongside the clubby and his mentor Mike to really understand what he needed, how he could have handled that situation better, and then he also made amends at fixing the relationship, and that too is an equal part of relational, living a winsome relationship kind of life, right? And so just think about examples in your life where you have that, where you could have handled it better. And that's what this book touches on, how to mentally prepare yourself to handle the different situations through this 5-tool framework. And Sam learned the hard way, like we usually do. I mean, look at folks who have had broken relationships, who have had friendships, marriages, whatever, with their kids, right? As a dad, right? I mean, think back to all the things that caused those things to erode. And I think this book is for you because it'll help you look at things a little bit differently. And guys, I'm a business person, right? So I wrote this book because I felt like business leaders need to read this, by the way. But it extends to all areas of life, and that's what makes this so powerful.
Yeah, and let's talk about this colleague, this mentor, Mike, in Sam's life. He introduces him to this winsome concept, right? And he builds trust with him. And through equipping Sam and building trust, how does this overflow into others, and how does this overflow into his life?
Well, so this is the remarkable part about how I believe God made us, right? I mean, so Mike comes alongside Sam, who's really frustrated, and every relational situation he seems to be failing at. So then that impacts his professional success, right? He's not playing as well in the field. So think about that. Like that all manifests itself in different ways, right? Befriends Mike, the clubby, and the clubby basically says, "Hey, listen, you gotta start applying this process." And he, in his own winsome way, introduces Mike to the 5-tool framework. And really, what the 5-tool framework is you got to first grab in life. You got to grab your bat, right? If you're a baseball player, you don't just step up to the plate ill prepared like so many of us do with relationships, right? You grab your bat, okay? You grab your bat, put your bat glove on, You look at the field, you look at the field conditions around you, and like, okay, all right. And then, the step two, you're on the on deck circle. You step up to the on deck circle. You aren't at plate yet. So think about that, the preparation around that. You're in the on deck circle. What are you doing there? You're looking at all the conditions that exist. You're thinking in life that means control the controllables, right? What can I control? Manage your thoughts and emotions. Keep them in the present, right? So instead of feeling guilty about the past, which frankly you can't control now and will affect the future if you allow it, you prepare by focusing on your role in the moment. So think about that second step of being on deck. Think about that in life. You're preparing for, in a few weeks, the different holidays we're going to be going through. In a few weeks, Thanksgiving, right? You think about Christmas, you think about Easter, all these different holidays or big family events or big professional presentations or a date you might have for somebody you're meeting for the first time. What are you doing in the on deck circle of controlling the controllables and not allowing the past to affect the present or future? And that's on deck, right? And then 3 is you're actually at bat. That's assessing and responding. And we can get into that too. And then 4 is sacrifice and commitment, driving runs and actually driving the runs in. And then the 5th step, and I can talk about all these for a while, but the 5th step is getting back in the batting cage, and that's reflective growth. When you think about personally and professionally, so often. So think of for all you listeners, think of a situation where maybe you don't get along with somebody or there's some conflict. Okay. What are you doing after some of those situations, like Sam experienced in the grocery store, for example? How are you having reflective growth? How are you surrendering, again, your own desires or what you are right fighting with yourself, like not even with others, with yourself, rationalizing why I behaved a certain way, and instead shift that mindset around towards reflective growth. I should have done this better. It's okay, everybody, to be vulnerable, especially with yourself, and how you can improve and get better. And so anyway, like the 5-tool framework is really powerful, and Sam goes on this journey to learn it all. And what it does is it has this compounding effect. He focuses a situation and he handles it well. Well, then all of a sudden trust and respect grows with others as they see him handling situations better. And now all of a sudden certain frictions start to dissipate. And there's a removal of displaced energy around relational strife, and relationships grow. And so we shouldn't be surprised by the results. For those of you listening who maybe don't get along with a lot of people in this world, as my old man would say, we talked about earlier, he'd say, well, look in the mirror. Sounds like a personal problem. And I think part of this book is a little bit of that too, is like just the personal growth begins with, being honest with yourself. And the 5-tool framework helps arm you with that.
I like that. I like that a lot. Can you briefly go through the 5 tools?
Yeah. So like I said before, you got the, so you grab your bat, win-win. Okay. We talked about that a while. Second step, on deck circle, control the controllables, right?
Can we go back to that? So
yeah.
Grabbing the bat, let's really think about this as dads, husband, men, action takers. The action of grabbing the bat, stepping into that circle. What do you think that truly represents for us?
Well, for me, I think, the book's called Winsome, and I think we talked about a little bit at the beginning. It's basically surrendering this win-lose notion. So this is really the crux of it. It's surrendering like a win-lose proposition with a win-win. And really what it is, it's not about winning and losing. It's about everybody winning. And that's the whole win some. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to win all. It just means win some. You're going to win some. Everyone's going to win some. And trust me, I'm a tough love. Like, I'm not a big believer of participation trophies or any of that stuff in this world, right? But I'm talking about relationally. Think about it, relationally. Like, think about how competitive some people are on the playing field, and it's win-lose. And so they get relationships wrong because they think that's win-lose too. And so that's really the grab your bat part. Is I'm going to create a win-win situation where I'm going to set aside my personal agenda and come alongside others. So it's really getting that framework, established right from the beginning to help them get help them achieve their goals too.
Got it. Okay. So, and then the second step is control the controllables, right?
Yeah, that's on deck circle, controlling the controllables. That's again managing your thoughts and emotions, keeping them in the present moment. Don't let the past impact the present or the future, because it will if you allow it to. And then preparing by again, it's by being in the moment. You can't control the past. Being in the moment. So like Shohei Ohtani in the World Series, he could have struck out the first two at bats. He's facing the same pitcher, and this pitcher has been owning him. When he's on the end deck circle, he shouldn't be thinking about the fact that he's struck out. He should be thinking about the fact that I can only control the present. And this guy's got a great slider, but next time I'm going to be I'm going to be hanging back on his fastball. I'm going to crush it, right? I mean, like
Right.
that's really focusing on the present and future, not the past. And you see that in baseball is a great sport for analogy, because you see it when people slump, right? They're letting the past impact the present and future.
I can definitely see that. And I mean, even the future thing, like I just started reading this book as well called Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie, like an
Oh yeah,
old, like a classic.
oldie but a goodie.
It is. And there are several chapters in that book about exactly that, which is you can't do anything about the past. And you can plan as much as you possibly want for the future, and we encourage that. But you
Yep.
can't have anxiety or, around both of those. The only thing that we truly have is that present moment. That's really all we have. Like tomorrow, we just finished we just did our seventh annual Dad Edge Summit. And I will tell you, man, it was a very powerful event, most powerful summit we've ever had. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that the men that were there, we had about 150 guys there, and the men that were there, there was just tremendous, like really unexpected things that happened in people's lives over the past 12 months, that we were talking about. And one of the guys who helps me facilitate said, we're always one text message, one phone call, one conversation away from life altering news that we have no control over.
Wow.
We're always just one away from that, right? So, what is actually the point of having any anxiety around it, like around the future or the past? Because that's gonna come our way. It's how we're gonna respond to it, and what are we doing about being completely entrenched into the present? So let's talk about step number three. So yeah.
Yeah, and leading to step three is your at bat, and so that's assessing and responding to the situation.
Mhm.
And I come back to just to finish your thought and to segue into step three. So when my dad was dying, what did he challenge me with? He challenged me with, Brian, what on earth are you chasing? So, in other words, are you chasing selfish ambition? And don't be surprised when you're disappointed by the results. Like I was in my 30s, doing well, all the selfish ambition stuff I was chasing, I had fulfilled, but I was unfulfilled, right? So, and what it was his way of translating. Don't be surprised when you're not satisfied with the results. And so when you think about Winsome, when you're at bat, you've mentally prepared yourself. I'm going to surrender my things I can't control. I'm going to surrender. I'm going to focus on helping others, right? So now I'm at bat, and I got to assess and respond. So now it's about situational awareness, right? It gets a little bit more tactical in life because that is so important. I mean, it's Sam in the grocery store, right? It's how he is after a long day at the ball field or work, like all of us can relate to. You're coming home, you're exhausted, and your spouse has, maybe she's worked too, and it's been a long day, and you have young kids, and you're just exhausted. Okay, assess and step three, at bat, assess and respond. What's the emotional tone you need to walk into? What's the interaction you're walking into? Are you prepared for it? Okay. In baseball, it might be a runner on second base. Am I still going to try to hit a home run when there's no outs and it's a tie game and all we need to do is get that runner home? No, I'm going to be focused on maybe putting it on the opposite side of the field, getting the runner to third, sacrificing my at bat for an out and get the runner to third. Right. I mean, like you got to understand the moment, right? And I think in life, I mean, the other thing I like to talk about with this step is this notion of re-gripping, right? And I'm a physical guy, but like when I like to illustrate, right? So if I had a bat, sometimes, whoa, that was a fastball. Ooh, wasn't expecting that. Again, assess and respond. Step out of the batter's box, maybe adjust the, the batting gloves, regrip. All right, get back in there, right? That's what I'm talking about in life and in relationships. You don't step out of the batter's box and say, "Oh, I'm going to take myself out." No, you're still at bat. Like regrip, get back in there. That's step 3, and of course that leads to step 4, which is the actual results, and that's runs batted in. Right? It's not about personal glory. It's not about your home run or your batting average or your other things. It's about how do I drive runs in to help the team. And in life, that is what I mentioned earlier that Bob Goff described as love, right? Sacrifice and commitment. Sacrifice and commitment. And so that's where you try to advance the situation in front of you. You're helping others. And again, you're willing to sacrifice selfish ambition to help the team.
I like that. I want to ask you a question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but can I get a little philosophical on you?
Yeah, I love it.
So we're talking about the players, right, on the team, the ones who are at bat. These are the ones who are making big moves in life and they're living life and they're living life on purpose. What advice do you have for the people who are watching in the stands?
Wow. Well, I think I'm going to come back to our conversation earlier talking about what my dad really taught me, and that was, well, that you learn through catching things instead of espousing things. So I think bring it back to baseball or bring it back to the spectator versus the player in the arena, right? Is the spectator is equally responsible for observing and learning and growing and developing in their own way, right? I got a great example. I was talking to a colleague, and they grew up in a really tough family environment. And what they describe is that helped shape them for who they are today. And they took from it, the habits that they didn't like and said, I'm not going to do that, right? I'm never going to let that be me, right? Not on my watch. And then they've gone on to be great parents, great spouses as a result of seeing what they didn't like, right? And so I think the spectator is responsible for taking the virtues out of what's playing out in front of them on the field and correlating it to how they can apply it in their life. That would be my knee jerk. We all have a role. Like as a spectator, you aren't supposed to just spectate. You're supposed to take it in and then take from it and learn and grow from it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you answered that question because it's something that I've been really, really keen on for a long time. And that is, it's, if you really look at how people operate, right? If you look at professional sports, I mean, those guys are the 1%ers of the 1%ers of the 1%ers, right? And I think that they represent something that you and I actually stand for. And I'll tell you about that. And I'd love to just get I want to dig a little deeper on this one because I think it's really important. Sure. We were watching it was the Browns versus, oh my gosh, who were they reversing yesterday?
I can already say I'm sorry to hear that.
I know, right? But it was the Browns versus, I think it was Baltimore. And it was an amazing game. It was an amazing game. It literally came down to the last play of the game. And Lamar Jackson, like they were behind by 5 points, and like there was this massive rally by the Browns. They came back and they got ahead by 1 touchdown with 1 minute left, or 5 points. And the spectators were going nuts, and I looked. There was a drone or like there was something or a blimp, I don't know. They were filming it from the sky into the stadium, and like literally the players looked like ants. And you could see all these people in the stadium, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the stadium. And then you see the city, right? You can actually see the city. So you see this tiny stadium in this city, these tiny little players, literally like this, and they zoom in slowly on everything, right?
Wow.
And as they zoom in slowly on everything, you see the glory that this stadium is, right? It's all these fans, they're going nuts. There's tons of them. And you've got like these 22 men on this field, like the 1%ers of the 1%ers of the 1%ers, and we're watching them, right? And the people in the stands, I think, represent a lot of dads out there. And I don't say this to be insulting at all, but I just think it is what it is. In other words, we all people who are watching those games and we're diehard fans, there's a part of us they're like, I really wish I could do that. Like I really wish I could be one of those people, right? That
Yeah.
could play at that level. And here's the interesting thing that I think. I think we all could if we put in the same amount of time, the same effort. Now, granted, there are people that are gifted with other talents and that kind of thing. We won't talk about that, but I think given the right mindset, the right training, the right amount of time, there are more people that could probably make it to that level than what they think.
Yeah.
But people have this identity of like, well, I'm just an average person with lots of problems, or I'm just an average person with whatever, and I just watch this. And I think that the spectators represent people in life that don't really think that they can win some. I think that they just sort of sit aside and that's not for me.
Yeah.
And what I truly think from doing this work is I remember being a dad, and I still am a dad. I remember being that dad that watched everything. I wish I could do that better. I wish I could do this better. Had it be different, I think I could do this or that. And over time, I've I have encapsulated and owned the identity of I am a player on that field when it comes to being a dad and a husband. And guess what? I screw up. Like I screw up bad. Like there are times where I have the opportunity to catch that ball in my relationships, right? And I completely fumble it. Or I get hit from like an obstacle or a stressor or something that's going on and I have a bad game. But I'm still out there playing.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, and I think you're there too, but I want to send a message to guys out there that might be looking at other men or other things or other whatever, and they're just like, I wish I could do that. And the message I want to send to those guys, you can.
Yeah.
You
Amen.
can, right? I would love for you to speak some life into those guys because I truly believe that every guy has that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. This is awesome, Larry. I'm glad you brought this up because I think about like the whole Winsome, the whole notion of Winsome was about man in the arena. It's like the Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's not the ivory tower spectators, right? It's the men in the arena whose faces are marred by blood and sweat and whatever. Who dares? I forgot how the exact words is, but who dares valiantly and who may fail, but at least fails by being in the arena. And so for me, like that's super powerful. In fact, one of our CRM systems at one of my companies, we named Roosevelt because I wanted everybody there to know like we're in the arena.
Wow.
That's how powerful that notion is for me. So when you talk about this, it speaks to me. And by the way, like I think you could write another Winsome book, part 2, or whatever. That's a football analogy to and that speaks to the spectator element versus the participant. I mean, there's definitely a lot there. And my words of encouragement would be couple different things. Even like step 5 of the 5-tool framework is getting back. The batting cage, reflective growth. I mean, that is being like almost a spectator on what you just witnessed for yourself, right? So how can you take what you're watching on the playing field and what you're experiencing in your own playing field and get back in the batting cage and try to get better every day? So that's a call to action. But to directly answer what you're saying, that I think words of encouragement are that, hey, listen, if nothing extraordinary in this world was achieved by people doing, by being a spectator, right? By doing nothing, right? You can argue that you can do extraordinary things by doing the ordinary things extra well, right? Every day. And so, but what's the common thread on that? They're in the arena. They're in the arena. So, that's why I pick up your bat. I mean, that's what I love about baseball too, is, you're in the Hall of Fame if you hit 300 now. I mean, like you hit 300, you failed, 70% of the time and you're still in the Hall of Fame. And I love that element of it because it just promotes all of us get in the field. What do you have to lose? We're all going to fail the majority of the time. And so I think that, that freedom of failure is a real thing in this world. And surrendering the selfish ambition, all that stuff matters. But being in the arena and having a bias for action, be willing to fail, surrendering the outcome, all of those things are super important. In fact, there's one thing that I talk about often in my companies. Really, it's like addictive leadership. It's called, right? And really, and this is a take from some dependency programs to help people get through what they're going through, right? And it kind of simplifies it. But when you're trying to really step out of your comfort zone, right, and be that person of impact and influence, well, what do you need to do? You need to be vulnerable. Okay, what do I need to? And I do this because what does this mean? I'm being vulnerable here. If I don't want to be vulnerable, I would do this, right? But I'm being vulnerable here, right?
Right.
Be vulnerable, surrender the outcome, win or lose, right? That's being in the arena. But then be willing to do the work. You're on the playing field, do the work. And that approach of being vulnerable, surrendering the outcome, but then being willing to do the work is a powerful sort of playbook for any of us listening, right? Any of you guys listening, because I'm telling you, like, it starts with that. And I think the machismo part of our society would lead you to believe that, you can't be vulnerable. I don't know about you, Larry, but like, I have a hard time respecting people who aren't vulnerable.
I have a hard time. Yeah. Or even relating, right?
Yeah, totally. And do you know what it reeks of? I want every listener should think about this. It reeks of insecurity. Like, being vulnerable means that you're secure in your surroundings. You're secure certainly with the person you're being vulnerable with, but you're being vulnerable to yourself. And to me, that's the only way you can learn and grow. If you have this facade, this Teflon sort of exterior, and you aren't willing to, well, that means you're hiding something. And so I just think that the degree of being vulnerable is extremely powerful for personal growth. And that helps you get in the arena. That helps you be, a person of action and activity and growth.
We've been saying this statement in the dad edge community a lot, but the man who has nothing to hide is the most powerful man in the room. Because it's just like, you can't argue with that guy, right? Like me and my so I have a father-in-law, and he's a tough dude. He's a blue collar guy. He's 68 years old, and the guy still rides dirt bikes, and he can outride like me and my two brother-in-laws like all day long. The guy just smokes us, right? And my wife was raised on dune buggies and dirt bikes. She's got two younger brothers, all dirt bikes. But so throughout the year, my father-in-law will be like, "Hey, like let's go dirt bike riding," right? And there's always somebody who gets hurt every year, right? So 1 week before our summit, this was like last year, and I'm sorry, a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "Hey, we're going dirt bike riding on Thursday." I had to leave the following Monday to go to, and I was just like, "Oh God." And I just told him, I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm really, really busy that day. I can't get out of work. The summit's the next week. I just can't do it. And he's like, and I knew I was full of crap. And my father-in-law he goes, "You're scared, aren't you?" And I go, "Absolutely. I'm actually absolutely terrified to get hurt." I was like, "I'll be dead." Like, it has nothing to do with my schedule. I could cancel everything. I was like, "I'm terrified to get hurt." I was like, "If I get hurt," I was like, "I can't travel to our summit next week." I was like, "We have like 50 grand of expenses on the line, along with, all the 150 dudes who are showing up waiting for this summit. If I get hurt and I can't do it, I am so screwed. It's not even funny." So I'm absolutely terrified like a little girl. And that's why I'm not going. And he's like, "Why didn't you just say that? We could punch holes in your other story all day long. We can't punch holes in that." Right.
Well said. Well
Yeah.
stated.
I was like, "Yeah, touche. I should have just been honest. I don't want to go. I'm scared."
Oh, that's a good example though.
Yeah.
Just being vulnerable,
Yeah.
surrendering the outcome, and be willing to do the work. It's a good mantra.
I appreciate you, man. Can I ask you a question and I'll be honest, man. I don't know you that well. I'm thinking you'll be okay with this question. It also might be a question and be like, I'm going to punch you in the face for even asking this, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you something that's really on my mind.
Yeah.
You were close to your dad? You could
Yes.
tell. Okay. I don't know if you've ever been asked this, but I'm dying to know. Brian, if you had the opportunity right now, 11 years later, to sit with your dad, and you had 5 minutes with him and you wanted to just pour your heart out to him, just what he meant to you, or just something that he taught you, or just something that you weren't able to share with him, like what would you tell him?
I think I'd be overwhelmed and overfilled with
Sure.
this notion of gratitude. Just really from an emotional, deeply personal perspective of dad, thank you. Like all of your toil, all of your strife, all of your suffering, while you were here on earth, was worth it. Was worth it. And the fact that you died young, it was worth it because what it's done is it left a lasting legacy that has really impacted me and others as a result of my leadership and your leadership of me. And it's transcendent. You've had an echo effect, and so I mean, but it would be overwhelmingly this notion of gratitude and thankfulness, and I wouldn't like it wouldn't be any of like daddy shouldn't have smoked. He by the way, he died of smoker's lung cancer, right? Very preventable. I mean, now like they've come out with medicine since it probably would have kept him alive a lot longer, but it was a preventable, carcinoma kind of stuff, right? I mean, smoker's cancer, right? Smoked, because back then, I mean, he went in the military at a young age and smoked since he was 18, right? It's just that's what they did, and it wouldn't be anything about that because his legacy in the 67 years and certainly the 30 whatever years I knew him or I was alive while he was around, or he brought me into this world, um, was I mean pure gratitude, and I think in some ways, there is a quality versus quantity. I mean, and maybe that's a little bit of a rationalization, being a son who lost their dad at a young age. Maybe I am rationalizing that, guilty, but when I reflect on the quality moments that we had with him, and just pure gratefulness. He was an activator and a connector, and that gift he extended to me, and it would just be pure thankfulness.
That's you're a faith-based guy. Do you believe that your dad heard that?
Oh yeah, I mean, no doubt, no
I
doubt,
do. Yeah.
and I mean, every day, I mean, just he's a world of eternity is a lot longer than the speck of time that's earthly, right? So I really it's just really cool to see what the impact he had in this short time here on earth, and frankly, it's held me to a higher standard of don't let moments by, don't waste your time, um, and every day's a gift.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. Um, Guys, like I said, hey, we are talking to Brian Slipka today, and I'm holding this book up for those of you guys who can see us on YouTube. Winsome: 5 Proven Strategies to Win at Relationships, a Business Fable. Brian, you've done some killer work here, man. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you share stories about your dad, about how you go about your own fatherhood journey, how you go about marriage, quarter of a decade, quarter of a century. But no, quarter of a century, and the things you learned from your dad, and the beautiful way you put this book together. And I really appreciate, by the way, you allow me to go off course here and talk about other things that we've talked about in the past, like, hey, how do we engage the spectators into believing that they have a place on this field, right?
Yeah,
So thank you for doing that, and I love it. I could not think of a better way to end today's podcast than this beautiful gratitude dedication to your father. And thanks for humoring me, because like I said, I didn't want to offend you with that question. I didn't think I would, but there's always that chance because you just
yeah,
simply don't know somebody's experience. But thank you so much for being authentic and vulnerable and sharing what you did, man.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for all the good work you do, and for all the listeners out there. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is rubber and road stuff. This is like real life realities. When we leave this world, I mean, the relationships we leave behind are what's going to matter most. It's not going to be the balance sheet that we all have. It's not going to be the places. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love to travel, but it's not going to be the places we necessarily have gone to. It's going to be those around us and the memories we've created. So, and the relationships we have that we'll take with us. So anyway, just appreciate you having me on, Larry, and great job. Thanks for all you do.
Oh, my pleasure. And back at you, my friend. Gentlemen, we're going to have all the links in the show notes for you. A lot of the things we talked about on today's podcast, we'll have a synopsis of it, as well as a link for Brian's book, as well as actually, Brian, I didn't ask you this. Where can guys connect and find with you? Because that's connect and find you, because I want to make sure that we put those in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, but then also at winsomefable.com will help folks find me, and then you can find me really Amazon. You can order the book on Amazon, all that stuff. But to find me, definitely LinkedIn. The truenorthfamily.com is my family of businesses. We have a collection of almost 30 companies that I own and operate. So that's a whole nother story. And again, when you think about cultural impact and influence, how are you letting your light shine? So all those dads out there, just how do you let your light shine no matter what you're doing? You may be a mechanic, you may be a pilot, you may be an athlete, you may be, a president of a big company, you may own your own company. But what degree of impact and influence can you control, right? And a 5-tool framework to have that impact on others. And so anyway, just call to action for all of us. Let's be in the arena.
I love it, man. I love it. Guys, not to worry. We're going to have all these links in the show notes for you. Head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday 181 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday 181 for this show. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Brian, thank you for coming on, brother. This was awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry.